Wagwan, me rude boys and rude girls, big up yourself. Let's get into the comments from the last week, shall we? On the Unknown Armies Know Your Role video, Fire Touched says, "Thank you for this journey through time. The last time I saw Unknown Armies was at the beginning of 2000. I didn't know that the game still had support. The digital books are currently on offer at Drive-Thru RPG. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get the game on the table either, therefore it's not really worth purchasing. Nevertheless, I have to admit that I found the game very good even back then. However, I always preferred World of Darkness." So yeah, if you're curious, I think the core book, the first core book, is something like $14 on Drive-Thru, something like that. And that's worth a punt if you're curious. The rules, the core rules can be put on a single double-sided sheet of paper. So, you know, it's an efficient game, if nothing else. I always preferred World of Darkness to it as well, mostly because of the relative power levels. I mean, starting out in World of Darkness, you're not super powerful or anything, particularly in the newer edition. But you were at least somewhat effective, while Unknown Armies seems to largely be about incompetent characters tripping over their own dick all the time. So, yeah, has a different character to it, and I think needs a somewhat skilled games master to make it work effectively. Kev O'Reilly says, "The Epidiromancer didn't make the cut. Come on, people." Yes. Quick and Dirty Roleplaying says, "That's the rub with D percentile systems like BRP, WFRP, and Unknown Armies. Starting characters suck major balls. With Unknown Armies, there's at least the flip-flop mechanic with starred skills, where if you test a starred skill, you decide which D10 is the tens and which is the units. Even then, those starred skills are few and far between, and characters will behave like klutzes. What would really help out with the D percentile systems like these is to treat a failed roll either as introducing a complication to the scene or a success with the mechanical cost, a la Torchbearer. Like that, failure still gets the narrative moving along, and the players can still get their win by agreeing to take a bite from a shit sandwich if they fail their roll." So, I don't think this is true of all percentile systems. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, if you focus, you can have effective core competencies, and your baseline chance is usually around a third of the time, which is a bit whiffy, but not too bad. In BRP, you absolutely can start with some decent core competencies, and at least in the current edition of Call of Cthulhu, helping each other out on rolls really does make a big difference and allows everyone to tick their skills and improve a bit faster. So I don't think it's a problem necessarily with percentile systems. It's that Unknown Armies doesn't calibrate its difficulties particularly intuitively or well. I think basically in most non-combat situations you could probably stand to add plus 20 to plus 30 to people's skills before they roll, and to make much greater use of the auto success rules and maybe extend them to the upper skills difficulties outside of combat. But yeah, it needs a tweak. A benefactor has stepped in to get me the 3rd edition, which they're super keen on. So when that arrives, I will take a look over that as well. Joseph Greer says, "I playtested the original edition back in the day and enjoyed how the system worked. Magic was definitely interesting and powerful." Now, interesting, I will absolutely give you. Powerful, however, probably not, for 2 main reasons. One, the magic just isn't that powerful, and 2, getting the major charges to use the extra powerful effects is rather prohibitive in terms of time or cost or rarity and so on, which is probably how it should be. But I still say if you want to run a sort of low-key magic system where you're pretty much always guaranteed to be better off punching someone in the face than casting a firebolt at them, then then yeah, it's fine. Pulp Herb says there's a bit of a setting change in the 3rd edition. I was on the Kickstarter. The big thing is the new Millennium events set up by the fast food majors went off, and since then the group has drifted some. The other factions are dealing with the fallout. Personally, I'd probably run it as a retro 90s game, as I think it was very much a product of its time and makes less sense circa 2015. It might make more sense circa 2024, oddly. I don't remember if the cutters survived and the books are packed, but I think they did. To be honest, the 3rd edition was, for me, a lot like Over the Edge 2nd, in that you couldn't recapture lightning, especially 90s lightning, again in a 2010s bottle. It wasn't as disappointing I wasn't as disappointed with Unknown Armies 3 as I was with Over the Edge 2, but same vibe. I think technically it's Over the Edge 3, but yeah, point taken. For me, I think a 60s or 70s setting would work very well. You know, all that new age hippie shit going off, cults, the Manson family, all of that kind of stuff would fit very much the vibe of Unknown Armies. The remakes issue is a big one. Atlas was kind of doing cool, cutting edge, very interesting, very deep, very adult in the non-pornographic sense work back in the 90s. So it makes sense why they would continue to pursue the edge and continue in the same direction, but the question is, does it work? With Over the Edge 3rd, I think they went too far too far in abstracting the system and reducing the G in RPG to such a minimal level. It ends up profoundly unsatisfying, whereas Over the Edge 2nd edition is still very much a touchstone for me, a piece of beautiful game design, apart from the combat. Trapdoor Spider says, +1 for Mr. Gone reference. You have a problem with women. How perceptive. Did you figure that one out when I kidnapped you? Or when I tied you up with leather straps? Of course I've got a problem with women. Everyone has a problem with women, because women taunt and tease you because they're attractive, and they punish you for being attracted. On the Across 1,000 Dead Worlds After Action report that I did with all the pictures and the smoke effects and the audio stuff and the music, Vaughan Healtherall says, this is actually pretty dope. You should continue it. I hardly give likes, but this gets one for sure. Yeah, the amount of effort required. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze in terms of people watching and so on, but I had a lot of fun making it. If I do more follow-on games, episodes of that, I think I'll make it a lot easier on myself by just doing audio over a single image, pretty much, and I think that will give better return. I'll still do the audio stuff because I enjoy fiddling with that. I'm still learning that process, and it's fun. It's fun to learn and to experiment on you all. But as for doing more episodes with that degree of effort gone into them, which took like 2/3 of my day, no, I don't think that's sustainable. But hopefully people will still listen in and be interested. Edward Kopp says, I enjoyed the production value and the aesthetic quite a bit. I'm a fan of far future, found tech style sci-fi, so I find the setting interesting. But is this just dungeon crawl in space? How would you envision running a campaign? So for me, yeah, it can be run as a normal game, but you can use the random generation stuff to produce interesting sites that the ships arrive at. So I would keep all of that, possibly play a bit more strongly as a games master with modifying that than I do as a single player. It isn't just dungeon crawl in space. I rolled very, very poorly and was basically under constant attack from the moment I landed on that planet, or on that asteroid. And that shouldn't be the case normally, so I think it is probably worth me doing at least one more episode in that series. But if I was running a campaign, I would have the characters chasing certain particular kinds of technology to solve problems for the ruined Earth that we're escaping from. I would draw very strongly on the Hichi series of books, the Gateway series of books. So things like Chon food and digital recordings of people. So, digital immortality, which are the two main themes of that series, I would say. Sort of defeating entropy, to put it in a grandiose fashion. So that's how I would focus the campaign. Finding out who the RC are, what happened to them, finding their technology to help humanity as a whole, that sort of thing. SSOQ says, I hope you do more of this kind of video for 1,000 Dead Worlds and other games. Maybe I will, but it didn't do as well as I would have liked, not commensurate to the amount of effort to produce the video. So like I was just saying, if I do more single player stuff for this and for other systems, I will make it easier on myself, and hopefully people will still tune in. On the Kalergi plan, gee, I wonder why a whole bunch of anti-Semites and conspiracy theorists have been stirred up for the last 6 months or so, I guess. LeChuck says, this video hasn't aged well, lol 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 lol, which is probably the most common comment on that, as if somehow it is self-evident that a conspiracy theory supposed to be in this book but isn't, by a mixed-race German aristocrat, is being enacted in order to something, rather than just the same old geopolitical and economic factors that have always existed, operating. So why hasn't it aged well? Where is the evidence for this conspiracy theory? A, that it ever existed, and B, that it is being enacted. What are you talking about? JC the car salesman says, his plan is already happening. How many white girls are lusting for a black man, and black men lusting over white women? Is it natural or just carnal urges? When you make things trendy and popular, people will follow like sheep, so you don't know if things are natural and authentic, just like the LGBTQ movement. Is it natural or just the trendy thing to do? Mate, I never put a baseball cap on backwards, and that was trendy for a great many years, right? I don't think people's sexuality and proclivities are as mutable as you would claim them to be. Sounds like jealousy and inadequacy, so it is now headcanon that you have a micropenis. Veronica Kachlinska says, leftist filth. Well, might be a bit grubby, but you're welcome for, welfare systems, national health, public housing, generalised public education, all of those other things that us filthy leftists have brought into the world. You're quite welcome. Just wipe them down first, all right? OG, not the OGGM, some other OG. Original Goyim, perhaps? I don't know. Says, you sound vaccinated. I'm not coughing. Is that it? But of course, if you're a conspiracy theorist and an anti-Semite, you're a plague rat as well. It just makes perfect sense. On the old Werewolf the Apocalypse review for the new edition of Werewolf, Barbaros Sedados, or Barbaro Sedados, I don't know, says, I personally liked Chronicles of Darkness more than the classic World of Darkness, precisely because it offered more freedom. I'm going to keep playing Requiem, Forsaken, and other games in the line instead of switching to these new reboots. Words cannot express how wrong your opinion is. Let's just look at Vampire the Requiem for starters. Alright, we're playing a role-playing game with a group of our friends, right, in a slightly fantastical version of the real world. So, we're going to have multiple vampires working in close concert with one another, and probably having some sort of capacity to travel in order to investigate and so forth. So, should we give our game rules where vampires feel horribly uneasy and compelled to attack one another, a bit like Highlanders The Quickening, and should we make it incredibly deadly to travel from one location to another? Probably not. Guess what Vampire the Requiem did? We give out. On my thank you video to Gary and Dave, because God knows Wizards of the Coast weren't going to do it, Lepidoptera666 says, unless you're a minority not showing any traits with a white male, this world does not care about you or any health. White males are the majority of the world. We're not. And just cogs in the machine. Maybe. Gary and Dave gave something inexpensive to everyone to divert from the hardships of life, but like most other things, it is being taken away from everyone and only given to a select chosen few. Just because I'm against some of the same things that you might find yourself against, or I find myself the victim of some of these social trends in the same way that you do, doesn't necessarily mean that I am on your side, even though people will, lump me in with you and these attitudes. It is hard to speak up on things because, having been excommunicated from one political wing, despite still holding the actual philosophical and ideological views to be found in that just genuine version of that wing, the people who have subsequently embraced me, had my back and so on, are not my fellow travellers ideologically. So I find myself self-censoring, biting my tongue a lot of the time. I know that may surprise some of you. When you say things that I find difficult to go along with. I hate censorship of all kinds, including self-censorship. So I think the world does care about people's health and problems. It's just that priorities are screwed currently because they were screwed historically. That doesn't excuse it, right? And I am not and will never be right-wing. I don't like this victim mentality on the pseudo-left, and I don't like it anymore coming from the right. The reason for my rejection of pseudo-left identity politics is the same as the one for my rejection of right-wing identity politics, and so on, and so on, and so on. I am fearful of losing what little place I still have in existing social circles by speaking up, having already been treated so poorly by previous social circles. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of waffling around the issue, but the point is, for the sake of my own sanity, I think I have to object a bit more to some of the things that the people around me who have been accepting and so on, and who I value, but some of you hold some views that I find repellent or difficult. Hopefully you'll be a bit more forgiving than the old social circles were. Doc Necrotic says, I crafted up a little blog post, in thanks to Gary and Dave, It's not much, but I'm glad I did it. Yeah, it didn't take off to the extent that I would have liked it to have taken off, but to whatever small extent we as a crowd can offer our acknowledgement and thanks to Gary and Dave and the other founders of role-playing, the more we can do that, the better, I think, because Wizards sure as fuck isn't going to do it without being mealy-mouthed and talking out of both sides of their mouth. So I hope more people speak up and say thank you and make a thing of it in whatever way they can. Tora58 says, you just paid more respect to the forefathers of this hobby than the people who own it. Thank you for doing this. I just wish Wizards had the same respect for them. Yeah, I was thinking about getting that anniversary book on the history with the reprinted edition and all of that, but after watching that interview and speculating on what they're probably going to say in that book and everything they said about sensitivity readers and so on, I have no interest now. You can find scans online. I might just download some of those and have them printed out and put in a binder or something. And I think that's a huge misjudgment on their part. Sure, a lot of people aren't as very online as the rest of us are and probably won't have seen those videos. Their YouTube videos don't get a huge amount of hits considering their size. But I think they've sabotaged a large portion of the sort of grognard audience that would have been interested in dropping $100 for a nicely bound, respectful backstory to TSR and D&D and a reprint of the original edition. I think it just put people off. But it's just another boneheaded decision in a long line of boneheaded decisions by Wizards. On my epic backstory comedy video, Dr. Necrotic says, that was marvellous. Thank you for this. Thank you for putting many a GM's angst to video. OGGM said something about backgrounds being, on the wheel of irrelevance. I hadn't actually heard anything. It was just, it bubbled up in my head and bugged me. So I decided to attack it from a position of amusement, at least. But I'm glad at least someone enjoyed it. On my Jewish porn conspiracy, user String of Digits, who appears to have been banned since, just calls me a shill. I'm curious what I'm shilling and how exactly you can tell that some naked person belongs to a particular religion, unless they're a man, of course. But even then, circumcisions are pretty popular in the States for various reasons that are beyond me. So what am I shilling exactly? On the Candela Obscura After Action report, R. Larkinson says, props to you for trying to run it. This could be a lesson in playing this one to truly know what gaps in the game need filling, thereby turning it into a more coherent and more palatable homebrew game, potentially later on. I like these reports. You know what it's like. You don't really know what a game is like until you actually bite the bullet and play it. That experience is extremely valuable for all sorts of reasons. Yeah, it drove me back to looking at Blades in the Dark, which it was derived from, and then Blades in the Dark was, of course, derived from Powered by the Apocalypse, which I don't like. Unfortunately, it kind of feels like they made enough changes for it to be rather inconvenient to reincorporate parts of Blades in the Dark. But it should be doable. Just needs more thought than I was willing to go through in a quick leaf through while The Simpsons was on the telly. Jack Fetch says, post-action reports are a great idea, as it gives an idea of how the game plays for those who might not have the opportunity to watch the live stream. Yeah, live streams, when you're not all professional performers, aren't necessarily the best or the most entertaining. But it's important to me in a world that includes Critical Role that more realistic depictions of playing tabletop games exist out there. So I'm not going to change the style of the live streams that we do over on Grim Streams, but After Action reports seem to be a good way of getting the best of both worlds to an extent. Kit Marlowe, one of our players over on Grimstreams, waxes loquacious in a big long comment, but I am going to read the whole thing anyway, so strap in. In order to avoid a sense of arbitrariness, storytelling games and a lot of rules-like games demand trust between players and games masters that usually has to be built organically over time, as those at the table become familiar with each other's foibles, playstyles, hang-ups, etc. Once this is established, both sides of the screen are freed from that disconcertingly weightless sense that the game is buoyed up only by gossamer-thin strands of agreement, rather than any objective rule that decides particular matters. However, I completely accept that I'm probably in a minority in valuing and enjoying that style of play, and I wouldn't be so foolish as to start from the assumption that GMs and players can just pick up a rule set and start playing in that manner. More objectively, Candela Obscura undermines itself by being neither flesh nor fowl. On one hand, it promotes storytelling, which a cruel commentator might also label theatre kids play, while retaining enough crunch to cut against that same grain, and worse, the sort of no but mechanics that can be exhausting for GMs and players to enact. Kit made a rare mistake there. The phrase is fish nor fowl. I have found, somewhat disappointingly, that most of these high narrative theatre kid games, clearly I am the kind of less generous commentator, I found that they're almost always improved by pushing the slider back towards more traditional modes of play. Like Dungeon World is the best implementation of Powered by the Apocalypse because it returns to familiar ways and means of doing things in games, and it has those familiar touchstones for you to understand what your character can do, is doing, how they act, and so on. If I look at Candela Obscura and then look at Blades in the Dark, as I did, Blades in the Dark improves by comparison, and that retains more traditional RPG elements than Candela Obscura does, but not by much. So it's finding that balance, I think, between the nouveau mechanics and the traditional mechanics. And the approaches to the game, which is the issue. But the major disjunct for me with a lot of these narrative games, with virtually all of these narrative games, is that they lack immersion. They lack that moment where you become your character, where you embody your character and you make decisions as your character. Part of the reason I used to do LARP for so long, which is necessarily relatively rules light, was because I got to inhabit that character for several hours of an evening, and that reliably gave me the most immersion possible, provided that my character's capabilities were things that I could at least somewhat replicate socially. So and you're freed from that when it comes to tabletop, but immersion is more difficult because you don't have to spend the whole time as your character. But yeah, shifting the dial a bit more towards traditional games, incorporating more G and not just RP, does seem to always improve these games. Gomchops says, yeah, the after action reports are good, keep them up. The game sounds like it needs a whole raft of rules and setting elements bolted onto it. That meta-level role-playing style you talk about is so unfulfilling, like a McDonald's. Glossy packaging fills a hole, but 20 minutes later, after the bloated, empty feeling passes, you're hungry for something more sustaining. It always feels a bit self-congratulatory too when you play like that, like you're saying, look how cleverly I'm playing this character. I reckon a GM with the time and effort could make the game work, but not without a bunch of rules and reworking of the setting. Yeah, I'd agree. I don't know if I think of fast food necessarily. I think more of that scene in Terry Gilliam's Brazil in the restaurant, right? Before the bomb shows up. Yeah, the waiter's asking them to select the number, tell me what you want, what's the number for the food, and he's trying to order steak, eventually gives him the number. But what arrives is not steak. It is 3 little piles of goo with a little sign of a photograph of steak, and so you stare at the photograph of steak while you're eating the goo, and this somehow substitutes. So yeah, a lot of these games, it's like you're staring at the illusion of an immersive role-playing game experience, but you're still eating goo. On the Evil Genius Games video, Sismon Skalka says, thanks to Jim and James for getting me to listen to the Dream Eaters. Haven't been able to stop. Yes, love them. They're kind of analog horror made music. In a lot of ways, it's strange and surreal in the ways that certain dark corners of the internet often can be. They hardly have any subscribers here on YouTube, so go and look up the Dream Eaters and watch their little musical skits and videos and follow them, because they're great. I will probably use more of their material until they start copyright striking people anyway. Also on the Evil Genius Games report, this is the last comment, Storm Knight says, not sure why you're positioning diversity hires as being in opposition to hiring on merit. Have you considered that people other than straight white guys can also be competent and the best hire for a role? Some of those people who left are very experienced and have a bunch of accomplishments. They may well do, but if you look at the complaints and so on they made, it sounded a lot like the internal self-sabotage that we've seen in lots of Hollywood productions, animation studios, comic book companies, and so on. But to more directly answer your question, if you hire purely on merit, right, you will hire a variety of people from different ethnic backgrounds and so on, because competency has very little, if anything whatsoever, to do with those issues, right? Whereas if you hire people based on the colour of their skin, where they like to put their genitals, what their genitals are, all of those kind of things, then you're not hiring on merit. So you won't be choosing the best people, because that's not the criterion upon which you're hiring people. So it's not that I think only straight white guys can be competent or the best hire for the role. It's just that if you zero in on someone's race or gender or whatever else, you're not focusing on competence. And I think competence is probably pretty evenly distributed, all things considered, right? So if you hire based on competence, you're going to end up with a natural diversity of people who are competent. Whereas if you fixate upon someone's identity, you will get people at many different levels of competency, and so the overall competency of the group, of the unit, of the company, of the creative team is dragged down, right? So the most fair, egalitarian, diverse way to actually hire people is competence, right? Because that is a criterion that cuts across. Whereas if you're doing diversity hires, you are, unfortunately, necessarily excluding certain people regardless of their competence. Hopefully that covers that. There wasn't really any housekeeping this week to go over, so that's that. I will see you Monday, probably. Zang.